The rain hammered against the diner windows as Isabel Carter wiped down tables, unaware that the forgotten briefcase in booth 7 would destroy everything she'd fought to build. Inside that sleek black leather case lay secrets worth killing for. Secrets that belonged to Marco Russo, the most ruthless crime boss on the East Coast. When Isabel tried to return it, thinking she was doing the right thing, she had no idea she was signing her and her mute little brother's death warrant. Desperate and hunted, she turned to the one man who could protect them, Luca Romano, her dangerous ex-lover and Marco's greatest rival. But Luca harbored his own devastating secret. The briefcase contained evidence that could destroy them both, and choosing to save Isabel meant starting a war that would either end in redemption or leave them all buried 6 feet under. What happened next would test whether love could survive in a world built on violence and betrayal. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is about to get darker than you can imagine. The rain drummed against the windows of Murphy's diner like angry fingers tapping on glass. Isabel Carter wiped down the last booth, her tired eyes scanning the empty restaurant. The neon clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., and she still had 30 minutes before closing. "Almost done, buddy," she whispered to her little brother Ethan, who sat at the counter with his coloring book. The 7-year-old looked up and gave her a small smile, but said nothing. He hadn't spoken a word in 6 months, not since the accident that took their parents. Isabel's heart squeezed tight every time she looked at him. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his big brown eyes held too much sadness for someone so young. She was all he had now, and some days that felt like carrying the whole world on her shoulders. "Let me just check the booths one more time," she said, grabbing her cleaning cloth. That's when she saw it. A sleek black briefcase sat forgotten in the corner booth, its leather surface gleaming under the harsh diner lights. Isabel looked around the empty restaurant. The last customer had left an hour ago, an older man in an expensive suit who'd ordered coffee and left a $20 tip. "Hey, Ethan," she called softly. "Did you see who was sitting here earlier?" Ethan looked up from his coloring and pointed to the briefcase, then shrugged his small shoulders. Isabel picked up the heavy case and turned it over in her hands. The initials M.R. were embossed in gold letters on the front. No phone number, no address, just those 2 letters that seemed to stare back at her. She tried the latches, but they were locked tight. "Someone's going to be looking for this," she said, more to herself than to Ethan. "Probably something important inside." She set the briefcase behind the counter and finished cleaning up. As they walked to their beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot, Isabel felt like someone was watching them. She glanced over her shoulder and saw a black sedan parked across the street, its windows too dark to see inside. Her hands shook as she buckled Ethan into his seat. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to him or herself. "Everything's going to be okay." But as they drove through the empty streets toward their tiny apartment, the black car followed them at a distance. The next morning brought new problems. Isabel opened their apartment door to find a bright yellow notice taped to the wood, eviction notice in bold red letters. Her stomach dropped as she read the words, 30 days to vacate premises due to unpaid rent. "No, no, no," she whispered, crumpling the paper in her fist. Ethan appeared at her side, still in his pajamas. He looked at the paper, then up at her face, and his own expression crumpled with worry. "It's okay, buddy," she said, forcing a smile. "We'll figure this out." But how? She was already working double shifts at the diner, and it barely covered their basic needs. The medical bills from the accident kept piling up, and now this. She made Ethan breakfast, the last of their cereal and the end of a milk carton. While he ate, she stared at the briefcase sitting on their small kitchen table. Those gold initials seemed to mock her. "M.R.," she said out loud. "Who are you, and what's in that case?" Part of her wanted to forget about it, to just drop it at the police station and walk away. But something held her back. Maybe it was the way the man had tipped so generously, or the expensive look of his clothes. This briefcase belonged to someone with money, someone who might reward its safe return. And right now, she needed money more than anything. "Okay," she said to Ethan, who was watching her with those serious brown eyes. "Let's go find Amar." They took the bus downtown to the business district. Isabel had looked up Amareus in the phone book and found several possibilities, but one stood out. Marco Russo, listed with an address on 5th Street. The building was a towering glass structure that made Isabel feel small just looking at it. She held Ethan's hand tight as they walked through the revolving doors into a marble lobby that sparkled like a jewelry box. "Can I help you?" asked the security guard, a mountain of a man in a black suit. "I'm looking for Marco Russo," Isabel said, trying to sound confident. "I have something that belongs to him." The guard's eyes narrowed as they landed on the briefcase in her other hand. He picked up his phone and spoke in low, urgent tones. Isabel couldn't make out the words, but his tone made her skin crawl. "Take the elevator to the 20th floor," he said finally. "Someone will meet you there." The elevator ride felt like it lasted forever. Ethan pressed close to her side, sensing her nervousness. When the doors opened, 2 men in expensive suits were waiting for them. "You the woman with Marco's case?" asked the taller one, his voice like gravel. Isabel nodded and held up the briefcase. "I found it at the diner where I work. I just want to return it." The men exchanged a look that made Isabel's blood run cold. "Boss wants to see you," the shorter man said. "Both of you." They were led down a hallway lined with dark paintings and heavy doors. The carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Isabel's heart hammered against her ribs. The office at the end of the hall was huge, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Behind a massive desk sat a man with silver hair and cold gray eyes. This had to be Marco Russo. "So," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "you have something of mine." Isabel stepped forward, still holding Ethan's hand. "Yes, sir. I found this at my work. I thought you might be looking for it." Marco's eyes fixed on the briefcase with an intensity that made Isabel want to run. "Open it," he said. I can't," Isabel stammered. "It's locked." Marco stood up slowly, his movement predatory. "You expect me to believe you found my case and didn't try to open it? That you don't know what's inside? No, sir, I swear. I just wanted to return it to its owner." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marco walked around his desk, stopping just a few feet away from Isabel and Ethan. Up close, Isabel could see the cruel curve of his smile. "Nobody returns things to Marco Russo out of the goodness of their heart," he said. "What do you really want?" "Nothing," Isabel said quickly. "I just wanted to do the right thing." Marco laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "The right thing?" He looked at his men. "Did you hear that, boys? She wanted to do the right thing." The men chuckled, but their laughter sounded like breaking glass. "Here's the problem, sweetheart," Marco continued. "That case went missing from a very secure location. The only way someone could have gotten it is if they took it." "Are you calling me a liar?" Isabel's mouth went dry. "No, sir. I promise you, I found it in my diner. A customer must have left it behind." "What customer?" Isabel tried to remember the man from the night before, but her mind was blank with fear. An older man. He had coffee and left a big tip." Marco's eyes glittered dangerously. "Describe him." Gray hair, expensive suit. That's all I remember." Marco stepped closer, and Isabel could smell his cologne, expensive and overwhelming. Ethan pressed against her leg, trembling. "You know what I think," Marco said softly. "I think you're lying. I think you took something that doesn't belong to you, and now you're here trying to play innocent." "That's not true," Isabel said, her voice rising with panic. Marco's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like iron. Nobody steals from Marco Russo and lives to tell about it. Ethan made a small, scared sound, and Isabel's maternal instincts kicked in. She yanked her hand free and stepped back, putting herself between Marco and her little brother. "Please," she said, "we haven't done anything wrong. Just take your briefcase and let us go." Marco studied her for a long moment, then nodded to his men. "Search them." "No," Isabel said, backing toward the door. "You can't do this." But the men were already moving, their hands reaching for her and Ethan. Isabel grabbed her brother and ran. They burst through the office door and down the hallway, Isabel's heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. Behind them, she could hear shouting and the sound of heavy footsteps. They made it to the elevator, but it was too slow. Isabel spotted a door marked stairs and pulled Ethan through it. They ran down 20 flights, their footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. By the time they reached the lobby, Isabel's lungs were burning. The security guard looked up in surprise as they burst through the door, but Isabel didn't stop to explain. She pulled Ethan through the revolving doors and out onto the busy street. "Taxi!" she called, waving her hand frantically. A yellow cab pulled over, and Isabel shoved Ethan into the back seat before climbing in after him. "Go," she said to the driver. "Just drive." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Isabel looked back and saw Marco's men standing on the sidewalk, scanning the street with angry faces. "Where to, lady?" asked the driver. Isabel's mind raced. They couldn't go home. Marco knew who she was now. He'd probably already sent people to their apartment. They needed help, but she didn't have any friends with money or connections. There was only one person she could think of, but the thought of seeing him again made her stomach twist, with old pain and new fear. 23 Oak Street, she said quietly. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror. "You okay, lady? You look like you've seen a ghost." Isabel stared out the window as the city blurred past. "Maybe I have," she whispered. The house at 23 Oak Street sat behind high iron gates like a fortress. Isabel had tried to forget this place, had tried to erase every memory of the man who lived inside. But now, with nowhere else to turn, she found herself standing at those same gates with Ethan's small hand in hers. Luca Romano's mansion was exactly as she remembered it, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The stone walls rose 3 stories high, covered in ivy that looked like green tears. Security cameras watched from every corner, and she knew armed men patrolled the grounds, even though she couldn't see them. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd walked away from this place, away from him. 3 years since she'd chosen freedom over the golden cage he'd offered. But now that cage might be the only thing that could keep her and Ethan alive. She pressed the button on the intercom with a shaking finger. "Yeah?" came a gruff voice through the speaker. I need to see Luca," Isabel said. "Tell him it's Isabel Carter." There was a long pause, then the sound of voices talking in the background. Finally, the voice came back. "Boss says to send you up." The gate swung open with a mechanical hum that sounded like a death sentence. Isabel picked up Ethan and walked up the long driveway, her legs feeling like lead with every step. The front door opened before she could knock. Viktor Petrov stood there, looking exactly the same as he had 3 years ago, tall, broad, and dangerous. His ice-blue eyes took in her appearance with cold calculation. "Isabel," he said in his Russian accent. "Been a long time." "Hello, Victor." He looked down at Ethan, who was hiding his face in Isabel's shoulder. "Who's the kid?" "My brother." Victor stepped aside to let them in. "Boss is in his office. You remember the way." The inside of the mansion was just as Isabel remembered. Rich, dark wood, expensive artwork, and the kind of silence that came from thick walls and careful secrets. Her heels clicked on the marble floor as she walked down the familiar hallway. The door to Luca's office was open, but Isabel knocked anyway. Old habits. "Come in," said a voice that still made her heart skip a beat. She stepped into the room, and there he was. Luca Romano, looking exactly the same, but somehow completely different. His dark hair was maybe a little shorter, his expensive suit perfectly tailored to his tall frame. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Those deep brown eyes that had once looked at her with love now stared at her like she was a stranger. He was sitting behind his massive desk, papers spread in front of him, a crystal glass of whiskey in his hand. When he saw her, he went completely still. "Isabel," he said, and her name sounded strange on his lips after all this time. "Hello, Luca?" He stood up slowly, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. She knew she looked terrible. Her waitress uniform wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. "You look," he started, then stopped. "It's been a long time." 3 years, Isabel said quietly. His gaze shifted to Ethan, who was still clinging to her shoulder. "Who's this?" "My little brother, Ethan." She adjusted her grip on the boy, who felt heavier with each passing minute. "Luca, I need your help." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or pain. "My help?" Isabel set Ethan down, but kept hold of his hand. The little boy looked around the office with wide eyes, taking in the leather chairs, the wall of books, the painting of a storm-tossed ship that hung behind Luca's desk. "I'm in trouble," Isabel said. "Bad trouble." Luca moved around his desk, his movement slow and careful, like a predator deciding whether to attack or retreat. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same expensive scent she remembered from their time together. "What kind of trouble?" he asked. Isabel reached into her bag and pulled out the briefcase. The moment Luca saw it, his entire body went rigid. His eyes fixed on the gold initials with an expression that made Isabel's blood freeze. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I found it at the diner where I work. The customer who left it, I tried to return it to the owner, but..." She swallowed hard. "It belongs to Marco Russo." Luca's face went white. "You went to see Marco Russo?" "I didn't know who he was," Isabel said quickly. "I just saw the initials and looked up the name. I thought I was doing the right thing. But he accused me of stealing it. His men tried to grab us, and we ran." Luca stared at the briefcase like it was a poisonous snake. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "No," Isabel whispered. "That's why I came here. You're the only person I know who might understand this world." Luca looked at her for a long moment, then at Ethan, who was pressed against her leg and watching everything with frightened eyes. "Victor!" Luca called. His right-hand man appeared in the doorway, as if he'd been waiting just outside. "Take the case," Luca said. "Check it for tracking devices, then bring it back." Victor took the briefcase without a word and disappeared. "Sit," Luca said to Isabel, gesturing to the leather chairs in front of his desk. Isabel sat down and pulled Ethan onto her lap. The little boy buried his face in her shirt, overwhelmed by the strange place and the tension in the air. Luca poured himself another whiskey and took a long sip before speaking. "Marco Russo is not just any businessman, Isabel. He's the head of the most violent crime family on the East Coast. If something of his went missing, he won't stop until he gets it back." "But I was just trying to return it," Isabel said. "I didn't take anything." "It doesn't matter what you intended," Luca said. "What matters is that you've seen something you shouldn't have seen, and now Marco knows your face." The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. "What does that mean?" Luca's jaw clenched. It means you're not safe. Either of you. Isabel felt Ethan tremble in her arms. This couldn't be happening. She'd just been trying to do the right thing, and somehow she'd dragged them both into a nightmare. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Luca studied her face for a long moment. "You have two choices. You can disappear, new names, new city, new life. I can make that happen for you. Or you stay here where I can protect you." The word protect hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them wanted to cross. Isabel remembered what Luca's protection had felt like before, safe but suffocating, like being wrapped in velvet chains. "For how long?" she asked. "Until this is over." "And when will that be?" Luca's smile was bitter. "Wars with Marco Russo don't have expiration dates, Isabel. They end when someone dies." Victor returned 15 minutes later with the briefcase and a grim expression. He set it on Luca's desk and leaned in to whisper something in his boss's ear. Luca's face darkened with each word. "What is it?" Isabel asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Luca opened the briefcase with careful fingers. Inside, nestled in gray foam, were stacks of documents, a small black flash drive, and what looked like photographs. He picked up one of the papers and scanned it, his expression growing more troubled by the second. "This isn't just business papers," he said quietly. "These are records, financial transactions, shipping manifests, names and dates." He looked up at Isabel with something that might have been pity. "This briefcase contains enough evidence to destroy half the crime families in the city." Isabel's stomach dropped. "I don't understand." Someone was gathering information on Marco's operation, probably planning to sell it to the FBI or use it for blackmail. Luca closed the case with a sharp click. "Whoever that customer was at your diner, he wasn't just some businessman. He was a spy, and he left this behind on purpose." "On purpose?" "Think about it. A man careful enough to gather this kind of intelligence doesn't just forget a briefcase. He left it there because he was being followed, probably by Marco's men. He chose your diner as a dead drop, somewhere he thought it would be safe until he could come back for it." Isabel felt sick. "But he never came back." "No," Luca said grimly. "He didn't. Which means Marco probably found him first." Ethan shifted in Isabel's arms, and she realized her hands were shaking. The little boy looked up at her with worried eyes, and she tried to smile for his sake. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now Marco thinks you took his briefcase," Luca said. "He thinks you've seen what's inside, which makes you a threat, and Marco Russo doesn't leave threats alive." The words hit Isabel like ice water. She pulled Ethan closer, breathing in the familiar scent of his strawberry shampoo. How had trying to do the right thing gone so wrong? "I want to leave," she said suddenly. "New names, new city, whatever it takes. I don't want any part of this." Luca walked around his desk and sat on the edge, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "It's too late for that now, Isabel. Marco's men followed you to your apartment building this morning. They know where you live, where you work, probably where your brother goes to school." Isabel's blood turned to ice. "How do you know that?" "Because I've had people watching you since yesterday." "You've been watching me?" The words came out sharper than she intended. Luca's expression didn't change. "A woman and child matching your description were asking about Marco Russo. Word travels fast in my world. I had to know if you were working for him or against him." "So you've been spying on me." "I've been trying to figure out if you were in danger or if you were the danger," Luca said. "Turns out it was both." Isabel stood up, holding Ethan tight. "I don't like being watched. I don't like being controlled. That's why I left you in the first place." Pain flickered across Luca's face, gone so quickly she almost missed it. This isn't about what happened between us, Isabel. This is about keeping you and your brother alive. And what if I don't want your protection? What if I'd rather take my chances on my own? Luca was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and pressed a button. Bring up the surveillance photos from this morning. A minute later, Victor returned with a tablet. Luca took it and showed Isabel the screen. Her heart stopped. The photos showed her apartment building from across the street. In one image, 2 men in dark suits were talking to her landlord, Mrs. Chen. In another, one of them was picking the lock on her front door. A third showed them inside her small living room, going through her things. They've been in your home, Luca said quietly. They know what you look like, what your brother looks like, what kind of life you live. Running won't help now because they'll find you wherever you go. Isabel sank back into the chair, feeling like the walls were closing in. Ethan looked between her and Luca, sensing the tension but not understanding it. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to let me keep you safe," Luca said. "Both of you." "For how long?" "However long it takes." Isabel looked around the office that had once felt like a prison. The heavy curtains, the locked windows, the constant presence of armed men just outside the door. She'd fought so hard to escape this world, and now she was being pulled back into it by circumstances beyond her control. "I need to think," she said. Luca nodded. "Victor will show you to the guest wing. You'll have your own space, your own bathroom. Adriana still works here. She'll help with anything you need." Adriana. Isabel remembered the older woman with the kind eyes and gentle hands who'd tried to mother her during those months when she'd lived here before. At least there would be one friendly face in this fortress. "What about my job?" Isabel asked. "I have to work. I have bills to pay." "I'll take care of your bills," Lucas said. "I don't want your money." "It's not charity, Isabel. It's compensation for the danger you're in because of information that's now in my possession." She wanted to argue, but what choice did she have? She couldn't go back to the diner with Marco's men looking for her. She couldn't go home. She couldn't even call the police because what would she tell them? That she'd accidentally gotten involved in a mafia war? "1 week," she said finally. "I'll stay 1 week while we figure out another solution." Luca's smile was sad. "I hope that's enough time." Victor led them through the mansion to a wing Isabel had never seen before. The guest quarters were beautiful, a sitting room with cream-colored walls and soft furniture, a bedroom with a king-sized bed covered in white linens, and a smaller bedroom that would be perfect for Ethan. "Adriana will bring you clothes and anything else you need," Victor said. "Meals are served in the main dining room, but you can request room service if you prefer." After he left, Isabel sat on the edge of the big bed with Ethan beside her. The little boy was being unusually quiet, even for him. He kept looking around the room with wide eyes, taking in the expensive furniture and artwork. "Pretty fancy, huh, buddy?" Isabel said, trying to keep her voice light. Ethan nodded and leaned against her side. He pointed to the window and then to himself, a gesture Isabel had learned meant, "Can I look?" "Of course," she said. They walked to the tall windows together. Outside, perfectly manicured gardens stretched as far as they could see. There was a fountain in the center, surrounded by rose bushes and stone benches. It looked like something from a fairy tale, beautiful and completely unreal. Ethan pressed his hand against the glass, and Isabel realized the windows were thick and probably bulletproof. This wasn't just a mansion, it was a fortress disguised as a home. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Adriana entered carrying a tray of food and a genuine smile. The older woman looked exactly the same as Isabel remembered. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, laugh lines around her brown eyes, and the kind of warmth that made you feel safe just being near her. "Isabel, dear," Adriana said, setting the tray down on a small table. "It's so good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Isabel stood up and found herself wrapped in one of Adriana's famous hugs. For just a moment, she let herself relax into the maternal comfort she'd missed so much. "This is Ethan," Isabel said when they separated. "My little brother." Adriana knelt down to Ethan's level, her face soft with understanding. "Hello, sweetheart. Are you hungry?" "I brought cookies." Ethan looked at Isabel, who nodded. He took a tentative step toward Adriana, drawn by her gentle voice and kind eyes. "He doesn't talk much," Isabel explained. "He's been through a lot." "Haven't we all?" Adriana said softly. She pulled a chocolate chip cookie from the tray and offered it to Ethan. "These are special cookies. They have magic powers." Despite everything, Ethan's eyes lit up with curiosity. He took the cookie and bit into it, and a small smile crossed his face. "Magic indeed," Isabel said, feeling her first genuine moment of peace since this nightmare began. "I brought you both some clothes," Adriana said, gesturing to the bag she'd carried in. "Luca had Victor pick up some things from the store. I hope they fit." Isabel looked through the bags and found simple but well-made clothes in her size and Ethan's. Everything from underwear to pajamas to a warm jacket for the little boy. Either Luca had remembered her, sized perfectly, or he'd made some very good guesses. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Adriana patted her hand. "You're family here, dear. You always have been." The words brought tears to Isabel's eyes that she quickly blinked away. She couldn't afford to get emotional, couldn't let herself feel safe in a place she knew she'd have to leave. After Adriana left, Isabel helped Ethan get cleaned up and changed into new clothes. The little boy seemed fascinated by the bathroom, which was bigger than their entire kitchen at home. He kept touching the marble counters and staring at his reflection in the huge mirror. "It's like a palace, isn't it?" Isabel said. Ethan nodded and pointed to the bathtub, which was deep enough to swim in. "Maybe tomorrow we can try it out," Isabel said, "but right now I think we both need some rest." She tucked Ethan into the smaller bed, pulling the soft blankets up to his chin. He grabbed her hand before she could leave, his eyes wide with worry in the dim light. "I know, buddy," she whispered. "This place is scary and strange, and you don't understand what's happening. But I promise you I'm going to keep you safe, no matter what." Ethan squeezed her hand and then let go, trusting her promise in the way that only children could. Isabel sat in the sitting room after Ethan fell asleep, staring out at the gardens that looked silver in the moonlight. Somewhere out there, beyond these walls, dangerous men were looking for them. Men who wanted to hurt them for something they'd never meant to do. She thought about the life they'd built together after their parents died. It wasn't much. A tiny apartment, long hours at the diner, constant worry about money. But it was theirs. They were free to make their own choices, their own mistakes, their own small victories. Now they were trapped in a golden cage, dependent on the protection of a man she'd once loved and lost. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Adriana. Instead, Lucas stepped through the door carrying 2 cups of tea. He changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a simple black sweater, and somehow that made him look more dangerous, not less. "Thought you might want some tea," he said, offering her one of the cups. Isabel accepted it gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm ceramic. "Thank you." Luca sat across from her in the other chair, his long legs stretched out in front of him. For a moment, they just sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea and not looking at each other. "He seems like a good kid," Luca said eventually. He is. The best. Isabel's voice was soft with love. He's been through so much, but he's still got such a pure heart. Sometimes I think he's stronger than I am. What happened to your parents? Isabel stared into her tea. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light and hit them head on. Mom died instantly. Dad held on for 3 days in the hospital, but she swallowed hard. Ethan was in the car too. He wasn't badly hurt physically, but after that he just stopped talking. I'm sorry, Luca said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. That's when I became his guardian. Social services wanted to put him in foster care, but I fought for him. Got 3 jobs, found us that little apartment, proved I could take care of him. She looked up at Luca. I was so proud of the life we'd built. It wasn't much, but it was ours. It sounds like you did an amazing job. And now it's all gone, Isabel said, feeling the weight of everything crash down on her again. My job, our home, our freedom, all because I tried to return a stupid briefcase. Luca leaned forward, his brown eyes intense. This isn't your fault, Isabel. You couldn't have known what you were walking into. But I should have just left it alone. Should have turned it into the police or thrown it away or anything except what I did. You tried to do the right thing, Luca said. In a world full of people who look the other way, you tried to do what was right. That's not something to regret. Isabel felt tears threatening again. Even if it gets us killed, I won't let that happen. The certainty in his voice made her look up. Luca was watching her with an expression she remembered from before, protective and fierce and completely uncompromising. Why? She asked. Why would you put yourself at risk for us? I walked away from you, Luca. I chose to leave. Pain flickered across his face. You had your reasons. That doesn't answer my question. Luca was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the moonlit gardens. When he spoke, his voice was so soft she almost missed it. Because some things are worth protecting, even when they don't belong to you anymore. The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Isabel felt her heart skip, remembering all the reasons she'd fallen for him in the first place. His strength, his loyalty, the way he loved completely and without reservation. But she also remembered why she'd left. The suffocating control, the constant danger, the way his world had slowly consumed every piece of her independence until she felt like she was disappearing. Luca, she started, but he held up a hand. I'm not asking for anything, Isabel. I'm not trying to win you back or make you feel obligated. I'm just trying to keep you and your brother safe until this is over. And then you're free to go wherever you want. I'll make sure you have new identities, money to start over, whatever you need. Isabel studied his face, looking for the catch she was sure had to be there. But all she saw was sincerity and something that looked like resignation. I should get some sleep, she said finally. It's been a long day. Luca stood up and took her empty cup. If you need anything, there's a phone by the bed. Just press 0 and someone will help you. He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Isabel? Yes? I know. This isn't the life you chose. I know being here brings up things you'd rather forget. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you felt safe enough to come to me when you were in trouble. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the moonlight and memories she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. In the distance, she heard the low rumble of cars on the street beyond the gates. Somewhere out there, Marco Russo's men were still looking for them, still planning to hurt them for something they'd never meant to do. But here, in this beautiful room behind bulletproof windows and armed guards, she was safe. Ethan was safe. For now. Isabel finished getting ready for bed, then stood in the doorway of Ethan's room for a long moment, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful in the dim light, free from the worry and fear that had been his constant companions for months. Maybe Luca was right. Maybe trying to do the right thing wasn't something to regret, even when it led to trouble. Tomorrow she would figure out what came next. Tomorrow she would make plans and decisions and try to reclaim some control over their situation. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt truly safe. Even if that safety came with a price she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Isabel woke to the sound of gunfire. She bolted upright in the unfamiliar bed, her heart hammering as rapid bursts of automatic weapons echoed through the morning air. Sunlight streamed through the bulletproof windows, but the beautiful gardens outside looked different now. Men in dark clothing were running across the lawn, taking cover behind trees and fountains. "Ethan!" she called, rushing to his room. The little boy was already awake, huddled under his blankets with his hands pressed over his ears. His eyes were wide with terror, the same look he'd had in the hospital after the car accident. "It's okay, buddy," Isabel said, scooping him into her arms. "We're safe inside." But even as she said the words, she could hear boots running in the hallway outside their door, shouted orders in voices she didn't recognize, the sharp crack of breaking glass somewhere in the house. The door burst open and Victor appeared, his usually neat appearance disheveled. He had a gun in his hand and blood on his shirt. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Now." "What's happening?" Isabel asked, clutching Ethan tighter. "Marco's men found the house. They're trying to breach the perimeter." Victor grabbed a bag from the closet and started shoving clothes into it. "Boss wants you in the safe room until we can get you out." Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. Ethan buried his face in Isabel's shoulder, his small body shaking. "Where's Luca?" Isabel asked. "Handling the situation?" Victor said grimly. "Can you run?" Isabel nodded, though her legs felt like jelly. Victor led them out of the room and down a hallway she'd never seen before. The sounds of battle grew louder, men shouting, glass breaking, the steady pop, pop, pop of gunfire. They reached a heavy wooden door that Victor opened with a keycard. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "Safe room," Victor explained. "Bulletproof, soundproof, completely secure. You'll wait there until this is over." They hurried down the stairs into a small, windowless room lined with monitors showing different views of the mansion and grounds. Isabel could see Luca's men taking defensive positions, while black-clad figures moved between the trees. It looked like a war zone. "How many?" Isabel whispered. "At least a dozen," Victor said, checking the locks on the door. "Maybe more. Marco's not playing around anymore." On one of the monitors, Isabel caught sight of Luca himself. He was crouched behind the fountain in the main courtyard, speaking rapidly into a radio. Even from a distance, she could see the cold calculation in his movements, the way he commanded the battle like a chess master moving pieces. "He's going to get hurt," she said before she could stop herself. Victor glanced at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Boss can take care of himself. It's you and the kid Marco wants." The fighting continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Isabel held Ethan on her lap, both of them watching the monitors as the battle raged outside. Several of Marco's men went down, but so did some of Luca's guards. The violence was swift and brutal and completely outside anything Isabel had ever experienced. Finally, silence fell. On the monitors, she could see Luca's men checking the bodies and securing the perimeter. Smoke rose from one of the outbuildings, and the beautiful gardens were torn up by gunfire and scattered with broken glass. Victor's radio crackled. "All clear," came Luca's voice. "Bring them up." But as they climbed the stairs back to the main house, Isabel knew everything had changed. The illusion of safety she'd felt last night was gone, shattered like the windows that now lay in pieces across the marble floors. Luca was waiting for them in his office, and Isabel's heart stopped when she saw him. There was blood on his white shirt and a cut across his left cheek. His dark hair was disheveled, and his eyes held the cold fury of a man who just had to kill to protect what was his. "Are you hurt?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Nothing serious," he said, though she could see him favoring his left arm. "You?" "We're fine. Scared, but fine." Ethan was staring at Luca with wide eyes, taking in the blood and the dangerous energy that still radiated from him. Instead of being frightened, though, the little boy seemed fascinated. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Lucas said to Ethan, his voice gentler. "Sometimes bad men try to hurt good people, and we have to stop them." Ethan nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to him. "How did they find us?" Isabel asked. "Someone talked," Lucas said grimly, "or Marco's got better. Intelligence than I thought. Either way, this location is compromised." "What does that mean?" "It means we have to move. Tonight." Isabel's stomach dropped. "Move where?" "I have a safe house outside the city. More secure, harder to find." Luca walked to his desk and picked up a clean shirt. "Pack light. We leave as soon as it's dark." He started to change shirts, and Isabel saw the full extent of his injuries. There was a long cut along his ribs and what looked like the beginning of a serious bruise across his shoulder blade. "You need a doctor," she said. "I need to keep you safe," Luca replied. "Everything else is secondary." The words hit her harder than they should have. This man, this dangerous, complicated man who ruled through fear and violence, was willing to risk his life for her and Ethan. Not because he expected anything in return, but because he believed it was right. "Luca," she started, but he held up a hand. "Save it, Isabel. I know what you're going to say, and we don't have time for it now." He pulled on the clean shirt and winced as the fabric touched his injuries. "Victor will help you pack. Be ready in an hour." That evening, as darkness fell over the damaged mansion, they left through a back entrance Isabel had never seen before. Luca had changed into all black clothing and moved with the fluid grace of someone who was used to operating in shadows. 3 cars waited in the hidden garage, expensive sedans with tinted windows and bulletproof glass. Isabel and Ethan rode in the middle car with Luca, while Victor and other guards took the lead in rear vehicles. As they pulled away from the mansion, Isabel looked back and saw the broken windows and damaged walls. Just this morning, it had seemed like an impregnable fortress. Now it looked like what it really was, a battlefield in an ongoing war. "Will you rebuild?" she asked Luca. "Maybe," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't really thinking about it. "Depends on how this ends." They drove for over an hour through winding country roads. Ethan fell asleep against Isabel's side, exhausted by the day's trauma. In the dim light from the dashboard, she could see Luca's profile, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the eyes that never stopped scanning for danger. "Does it ever stop?" she asked quietly. "What?" "The violence. The constant looking over your shoulder. The wars with people like Marco." Luca was quiet for a long moment. "In my world? No. It doesn't stop until you're dead or out of the game entirely." "Then why stay in it?" "Because it's the only world I know. Because walking away means abandoning the people who depend on me. Because..." He paused. "Because some of us don't get the luxury of choosing a different life." Isabel thought about that as they continued through the darkness. She'd always seen Luca's involvement in organized crime as a choice, a path he'd taken because it offered power and money. But maybe it was more complicated than that. Maybe some people were born into cages they couldn't escape, just like others were born into freedom they took for granted. The safe house turned out to be a modest cabin nestled in dense woods about 50 miles from the city. It was nothing like the mansion, just a simple two-bedroom structure with basic furniture and heavy curtains over every window. "It's not much," Lucas said as Victor's men swept the interior for threats, "but it's secure." "It's perfect," Isabel said, and she meant it. After the luxury and violence of the mansion, this felt almost normal, like a place where regular people might live regular lives. They settled in quickly. Isabel put Ethan to bed in one of the small bedrooms, reading him a story from a book Adriana had packed. The little boy was unusually clingy, not wanting to let go of her hand even after his eyes started to droop. "Bad men gone?" he whispered, the first words he'd spoken in months. Isabel's heart leaped at the sound of his voice, even as it broke for the fear behind the words. "Yes, buddy," she said softly. "The bad men are gone. Luca made sure of that." "Luca, good man?" Isabel looked toward the door, where she could hear Luca's voice as he coordinated security with Victor. "Yes," she said finally. "I think he is." After Ethan fell asleep, Isabel found Luca sitting at the small kitchen table with a laptop and several phones spread in front of him. He'd finally let Adriana tend to his wounds, and she could see white bandages under his black shirt. "Planning our next move?" she asked. "Something like that." He looked up at her, and she was struck by how tired he looked. The events of the day had taken their toll, even on someone as strong as him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "That briefcase. What's really in it that's worth all this violence?" Luca closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Financial records going back 5 years. Names of corrupt cops and judges on Marco's payroll. Details about drug shipments, money laundering operations, murders that were covered up." He rubbed his eyes. "Enough to put Marco and half his organization away for life." "So why not just turn it over to the police?" "Because the police can't protect you from Marco's revenge, and because—" He hesitated. "Because some of those records might implicate people in my organization too." Isabel felt her stomach drop. "So this is really about protecting yourself?" "No," Luca said firmly. "This is about the fact that once this information becomes public, it's going to start a war that will consume everyone in it, including innocent people like you and Ethan." "Then what's the solution?" "I don't know yet." Luca's honesty was somehow more frightening than any lie would have been. "I'm still figuring that out." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest outside. It was so quiet compared to the city, just wind in the trees and the distant call of night birds. "He spoke today," Isabel said. Eventually. "Who?" "Ethan. First words in 6 months." Luca's face softened. "What did he say?" "He asked if you were a good man." "And what did you tell him?" Isabel looked at Luca, really looked at him. She saw the man who'd ordered his guards to kill to protect her. She saw the man who'd been willing to take a bullet rather than let Marco's men reach her and Ethan. She saw the man who'd held her brother gently while reading him a story, who'd spoken to him with patience and kindness, even in the middle of a crisis. "I told him yes," she said quietly. Something shifted in Luca's expression, surprise, maybe, or hope. "Even after everything that happened today?" "Especially after everything that happened today." They looked at each other across the small kitchen table, and Isabel felt the same pull she'd always felt toward him. The same dangerous attraction that had gotten her in trouble before. But this time was different. This time she wasn't a naive young woman looking for excitement. This time she was a grown woman who understood the cost of loving someone like Luca Romano. And for the first time in 3 years, she was starting to wonder if that cost might be worth paying after all. "Isabel," Lucas said, his voice low and rough. I know, she said quickly. This is complicated and dangerous and probably a terrible idea. Yes, it is. We should keep our distance. Stay focused on keeping Ethan safe and getting through this. Yes, we should. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and somewhere in the distance she could hear Victor's men patrolling the perimeter. They were safe for now, hidden away in their little cabin in the woods. But Isabel knew it wouldn't last. Men like Marco Russo didn't give up, and wars like this one didn't end with everyone getting what they wanted. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new difficult choices. But tonight, for just a few hours, they could pretend they were just two people who'd found each other again after a long separation. Tonight, they could pretend that love was enough to conquer the darkness that surrounded them, even if they both knew better. 3 weeks passed in the cabin like a strange, suspended dream. Isabel fell into a routine she'd never expected. Mornings helping Ethan with his schoolwork at the kitchen table, afternoons reading while he played quietly with toys Victor had brought from the city, evenings cooking simple meals on the old stove. Luca worked constantly, his phones ringing at all hours as he tried to find a solution that wouldn't end with all of them dead. Sometimes he disappeared for hours, meeting with contacts Isabel never saw. But he always came back, usually after dark, looking more tired and grim than when he'd left. Ethan was blooming in the peaceful environment. Away from the noise and chaos of the city, he'd started talking more, just whispers at first, then full sentences. He followed Luca around like a shadow whenever the man was home, fascinated by his quiet strength. "Why doesn't Luca live in a big house like other bosses?" Ethan asked one afternoon as they watched Luca chop firewood outside. Isabel looked up from her book. "What do you mean, buddy?" "On TV, the bad guys always live in big fancy places, but Luca likes it here." Out of the mouths of babes. Isabel watched through the window as Luca split another log with precise, powerful strokes. He'd traded his expensive suits for worn jeans and flannel shirts, and somehow he looked more like himself than she'd ever seen him. "Maybe he's not like other bosses," she said softly. That evening, after Ethan was asleep, Isabel found Luca sitting on the small front porch with a cup of coffee. The autumn air was crisp and stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Please." She settled into the wooden chair beside him, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "Any news?" "Marco's getting desperate," Lucas said. "He's put a price on your head. $500,000 to whoever brings you in alive." Isabel's blood turned cold. "How do you know?" "Because 3 different people have contacted me about collecting it." Luca's smile was grim. "Lucky for you, they're more afraid of me than they are tempted by his money." "This can't go on forever, Luca. We can't hide out here for the rest of our lives." "I know. So what's the plan?" Luca was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark trees. "I've been in contact with a federal prosecutor, woman named Sarah Chen. She's clean, not on Marco's payroll." "You're going to turn over the briefcase?" "I'm considering it, in exchange for witness protection for you and Ethan." Isabel felt her heart sink. Witness protection meant new names, new lives, never seeing anyone from their old world again, including Luca. "What about you?" she asked. "What about me? If you turn over evidence that implicates your own people, what happens to you?" Luca shrugged. "Probably nothing good, but that's not your problem." "Like hell it's not." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "You think I want to start over knowing you might be dead because you saved us?" "You did fine without me for 3 years," Lucas said quietly. "You'll do fine again." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Isabel?" She turned to face him fully, and in the dim porch light she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he'd been carrying for weeks. "The point is that I care about you," she said. "I never stopped caring about you, even when I was angry and hurt and convinced leaving was the right thing to do." Something flickered across his face. "Isabel." "No, let me finish. 3 years ago, I left because I thought loving you meant giving up who I was. I thought your world would swallow me whole, and I'd disappear into being just an extension of you." "You were right." "Was I?" "Because these past few weeks being here, with you and Ethan, it doesn't feel like I'm disappearing. It feels like I'm becoming more myself than I've been in years." Luca set down his coffee cup with careful precision. "That's the isolation talking, the stress. When this is over—" "When this is over, nothing," Isabel interrupted. "I'm not some fragile flower who needs protection from the big bad world, Luca. I'm a woman who's raised a traumatized little boy on her own for 6 months. I'm stronger than I was 3 years ago." "I know you are. That's not the issue." "Then what is?" Luca stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. "The issue is that my world is violent and dangerous and full of people who would hurt you to get to me. The issue is that I've already lost one family to this life, and I can't—" His voice cracked. "I can't lose another one." The pain in his voice made Isabel's chest tight. She stood and walked to him, placing her hand on his arm. "Tell me about them," she said softly. "Your wife and daughter. You never talked about them before." Luca was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Maria was pregnant when we got married. 19 years old and so beautiful it hurt to look at her. She didn't know what my business really was. I told her I was an import alt export." Isabel waited, not pushing, just listening. "Sophia was born on a Tuesday in March," Luca continued. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect little fingers, perfect little toes. She had Maria's eyes and this tiny birthmark on her shoulder shaped like a heart. What happened? I was careless, let my guard down. A rival family decided to send me a message by targeting what I loved most." His hands clenched into fists. "They planted a bomb in Maria's car. She was taking Sophia to a doctor's appointment." Isabel's heart broke for him. How old was Sophia? 18 months. The weight of his loss hit her like a physical blow. To lose a wife and baby daughter to violence, to carry that guilt and grief for years. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. After the funeral, I told myself I'd never risk caring about anyone that much again. I'd keep people at a distance, keep my business separate from my personal life." He looked at her. "And then I met you." "Luca." "You were so alive, Isabel, so bright and fearless and full of opinions about everything. You made me remember what it felt like to want things beyond just survival and revenge." "I remember," Isabel said softly. "Those first few months were magical, before everything got complicated. Before I got scared and tried to lock you away in a tower where nothing could touch you." Isabel felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't understand then why you were so controlling. I thought it was about power, not protection." "It was both," Luca admitted. "I wanted to keep you safe, but I also wanted to keep you mine. Completely, totally mine, where I never had to worry about losing you. And I felt like I was suffocating." "I know. That's why you were right to leave." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared past settling between them like a bridge they weren't sure they could cross. "What if we could find a different way?" Isabel asked finally. "What do you mean?" "What if instead of me disappearing into your world or you sacrificing yourself to save us, we found a third option? Something neither of us has considered?" Luca shook his head. "There is no third option, Isabel. That's the reality of this situation." Then make one. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a hope wrapped together. You want me to walk away from everything, Lucas said. My business, my responsibilities, my people. I want you to choose what matters most to you. And if I choose wrong, if Marco comes after us anyway, if other enemies see my departure as weakness and target the people I leave behind, Isabel took his hands in hers. Then we face it together, all of us, as a family. Lucas stared down at their joined hands. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to trust me the way I'm learning to trust you. I'm asking you to believe that love isn't weakness, it's strength. And I'm asking you to let me choose for myself what risks I'm willing to take. Before he could respond, the sharp crack of a breaking branch echoed from the woods beyond the cabin. Both of them froze, listening. Get inside, Lucas said quietly. Now. But it was too late. Dark figures emerged from the tree line, moving with military precision toward the cabin. Red laser dots danced across the windows as sniper scopes found their targets. Luca Romano, called a voice from the darkness. We know you're in there. Send out the woman and the boy, and nobody has to get hurt. Luca drew his gun with fluid grace, his body shifting into combat mode. Get to Ethan, he told Isabel. There's a safe room behind the bookshelf in his bedroom. Take him there and don't come out until I say it's clear. I'm not leaving you. Isabel, I said I'm not leaving you. She grabbed his arm. We face this together, remember? Footsteps on the porch, the front door exploding inward, shouts and gunfire, and the acrid smell of smoke. Luca pushed Isabel behind the kitchen counter as bullets shattered the windows above their heads. Stay down, he ordered, then rose smoothly to return fire. Isabel crawled toward Ethan's room on hands and knees, her heart hammering with terror. She could hear her brother crying, and the sound made her move faster than fear. She found him huddled under his bed, tears streaming down his face. It's okay, buddy, she said, pulling him into her arms. Remember what Luca taught us? When the bad men come, we hide until it's safe. They made it to the hidden safe room just as the bedroom window exploded inward. Isabel slammed the reinforced door behind them and threw the deadbolt, then gathered Ethan close in the darkness. The shooting continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Isabel counted each gunshot, each shout, each crash of breaking furniture. When silence finally fell, it was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. Luca, she called softly. No answer. Isabel's heart stopped. She pressed her ear to the door, listening for any sound of movement. Nothing. Stay here, she whispered to Ethan. No matter what happens, you stay right here until someone you trust comes to get you. No, Ethan grabbed her shirt. Don't leave me. I have to check on Luca. I have to make sure he's okay. He's dead, Ethan whispered, and the certainty in his voice made Isabel's blood freeze. The bad men killed him. No, Isabel said fiercely. No, Luca is strong. Luca is smart. He's going to be fine. But as she opened the safe room door and crept into the destroyed cabin, she wasn't sure she believed her own words. The living room looked like a war zone. Furniture overturned, walls peppered with bullet holes, glass everywhere. And in the center of it all, a pool of blood that made Isabel's knees weak. Luca, she called again. A groan from behind the overturned couch. Isabel rushed over to find Luca trapped underneath, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. Are you insane? He gasped as she helped lift the heavy furniture. I told you to stay in the safe room. And I told you we face things together, Isabel shot back, though tears of relief were streaming down her face. How bad are you hurt? I'll live. Where's Ethan? Safe room. Is it over? Are they gone? Luca struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. For now, Victor's men arrived just in time, but this was too close, way too close. Isabel helped him to his feet, letting him lean on her as they made their way toward Ethan's room. Marco's not going to give up, is he? No, he can't afford to. That briefcase is the only thing standing between him and federal prison. They collected Ethan from the safe room and surveyed the damage to their temporary sanctuary. It was clear they couldn't stay here anymore. "So what now?" Isabel asked. Luca looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke, his voice was different, resolved in a way she'd never heard before. "Now we end this," he said, "once and for all." "How?" "By giving Marco exactly what he wants." Isabel felt her stomach drop. "The briefcase?" "No," Luca said, his smile cold and dangerous. "Me." That night, as Victor's men secured the perimeter and tended to Luca's wounds, he laid out his plan. It was bold and dangerous and probably suicidal, exactly the kind of thing she'd expected from him. "Absolutely not," Isabel said when he finished explaining. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for us." "It's not a sacrifice," Luca insisted. "It's strategy. Marco wants me dead almost as much as he wants that briefcase. Give him the chance to take me out personally, and he'll jump at it." "And you'll be walking into a trap." "Yes, but it'll be my trap, not his." Isabel looked at Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully in the corner of the room despite everything that had happened. Her beautiful, brave little brother, who'd already been through too much trauma for one lifetime. "There has to be another way," she said. "There is no other way, Isabel. As long as Marco's alive and free, you and Ethan will never be safe. And as long as I'm alive and protecting you, he'll keep coming." The logic was sound, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked. "What if your plan fails and he kills you? Then you and Ethan disappear with new identities, far away from here. Victor will make sure you're taken care of." "I don't want to be taken care of by Victor. I want—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "What do you want, Isabel?" She looked at him sitting there with his bandaged shoulder and his tired eyes and his stubborn determination to save them no matter the cost to himself. "I want you to come with us," she whispered. "I want all three of us to disappear together and start over somewhere safe." "You know that's not possible." "Why not?" "Because men like me don't get happy endings, Isabel. We get brief moments of happiness before the violence catches up with us again." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Look around. Look at what my world has done to yours. A month ago, you had a job and an apartment and a quiet life with your brother. Now you're hiding in a bulletproof safe room while people try to kill you." Isabel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the damaged cabin yard. "A month ago, Ethan wasn't speaking. A month ago, I was working myself to death just to keep our heads above water. A month ago, I was so focused on just surviving that I'd forgotten how to actually live." "And you think this is living?" She turned back to face him. "I think these past few weeks with you and Ethan, even with all the danger, have been the most alive I've felt in 3 years." Something broke in Luca's expression. "Isabel, I love you," she said simply. "I never stopped loving you, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. So whatever plan you're cooking up, whatever noble sacrifice you think you need to make, forget it. We're going to find a way to get through this together, or not at all." Luca stared at her for a long moment. Then he started laughing, not bitter or cynical, but genuine and warm and full of something that might have been hope. "You're going to get us all killed with that stubbornness," he said. "Probably," Isabel agreed, "but at least we'll die as a family." And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Luca Romano, feared Mafia boss, master of violence and intimidation, looked like a man who believed in happy endings after all. The final confrontation came 2 days later, but not the way any of them expected. Isabel was making breakfast when her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Miss Carter?" The voice was cultured, professional. "This is Sarah Chen, federal prosecutor for the Eastern District. I believe Luca Romano has mentioned me." Isabel's heart stopped. "How did you get this number?" "Mr. Romano contacted me yesterday with a proposition. I'd like to discuss it with you in person." "I don't think that's safe." "Miss Carter, what if I told you there was a way to end this situation that didn't require anyone else to die? Would you be willing to listen?" Isabel looked at Luca, who was watching her with concern. "What kind of way?" "The kind where you get justice, your family gets protection, and Marco Russo gets exactly what he deserves. Can you be at the federal building downtown at 2 o'clock? We can't leave here. It's not safe. You'll have full federal protection from the moment you arrive until this is resolved. I give you my word." Isabel met Luca's eyes. He nodded slowly. "We'll be there," she said. 3 hours later, they sat in a conference room high above the city, surrounded by federal agents and lawyers. Sarah Chen was a small, fierce woman with intelligent eyes and the kind of presence that commanded attention. "Here's what we're proposing," she said, sliding a folder across the table to Luca. "Full immunity for your cooperation in our investigation of Marco Russo's organization. In exchange, you provide us with the contents of that briefcase and your testimony about his illegal activities." "And after the trial?" Luca asked. "Witness protection for all three of you, new identities, relocation assistance, the full package." Isabel felt a flutter of hope. "Together? If that's what you want, yes. The Justice Department has no interest in separating families." Luca was quiet for a long moment, reading through the documents. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Sarah said. "Marco Russo has been our white whale for years. Between what's in that briefcase and your testimony, we can dismantle his entire operation." "And my organization?" "We're not interested in small fish, Mr. Romano. We want the shark." Isabel could hardly believe what she was hearing. A way out that didn't require anyone to die, didn't require anyone to sacrifice themselves. A chance for all three of them to start over together, safe and free. "There is one condition," Sarah continued. "You'd have to stay in protective custody until the trial. Could be several months." "Where?" Luca asked. Sarah smiled. "There's a very nice safe house in Montana, isolated, secure, and completely off the grid. You'd be comfortable there." Isabel looked at Ethan, who was playing quietly with a toy car on the conference table. Then she looked at Luca, seeing hope and caution warring in his expression. "What do you think?" she asked him. "I think," Luca said slowly, "that maybe happy endings aren't just for fairy tales after all." 6 months later, Isabel stood on the front porch of a small farmhouse in Wyoming, watching Ethan chase chickens around the yard. He was laughing, actually laughing out loud, as the birds squawked and fluttered away from his grabbing hands. "Careful, buddy," she called. "They don't like to be hugged." "I know," Ethan called back, grinning, "but they're so fluffy." Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back against Luca's chest. He smelled like sawdust and fresh air instead of expensive cologne, and his hands were calloused from the carpentry work he'd taken up to keep busy. "How's the barn coming?" she asked. "Almost finished. Should be ready before winter." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Any word from Sarah?" "Trial's set to start next month. She thinks it'll be over by Christmas." "And after that?" Isabel turned in his arms, looking up into the face she'd never gotten tired of loving. After that, we decide where we want to spend the rest of our lives. Any thoughts? Somewhere with good schools for Ethan, somewhere quiet and safe and far away from briefcases and men in expensive suits. Luca smiled, the real smile that transformed his whole face. Sounds perfect to me. In the distance, Ethan's laughter echoed across the wide Wyoming sky. Marco Russo was in federal prison awaiting trial. The briefcase and all its dangerous secrets were locked away in evidence vaults. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future stretched ahead of them full of possibilities instead of threats. It had taken a near-death experience, a Mafia war, and more courage than Isabel knew she possessed, but she'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Love wasn't about giving up who you were for someone else. It was about becoming the best version of yourself alongside the person who saw your worth even when you couldn't see it yourself. "I love you," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "I love you too," he replied against her lips. "Both of you. More than I ever thought possible." And as Ethan's laughter carried on the wind and the sun set over the mountains in the distance, Isabel knew that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was trust your heart. Sometimes it was also the smartest.